Oh, that was beautiful. Hello, Algebra. Let's hit some math. Okay, today we're going to talk about factoring trinomials and how to use that in solving what are called quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are simply equations that have x squared in them or something squared. All right. A few lessons ago we learned about FOIL. Basically, if I have two binomials, I can make a trinomial by doing FOIL, by multiplying first times first, outside to outside, inside to inside, and last times last. What we're going to do today is we're going to do kind of the opposite of that. Kind of like there's multiplication and then the opposite of that is division. Well, there's making a trinomial out of two binomials. Well, the opposite of that is going to be what's called factoring. Factoring a trinomial into two binomials. So just like the name says, we're going to make two binomials here. Now, if you think about what we did to get the trinomial, the first thing that we did was we multiplied the first term times the first term. And so the first term of our two binomials is going to have to be a factor of this first term. If you think about it, the only real factor of this is going to be x and x. You see how that's going to work? So when we start with our binomial and we do multiply first times first, we're going to get x squared back. The last term, likewise, was a product of the two last terms of the binomial. And so if you look at 2, the factors of 2 are going to be 2 and 1. So we don't have a lot of choices here. 2 and 1. I think getting that far should be pretty easy, especially when there's prime factors that, there's not a lot of choices here. Now at this point, let's think about this middle term. This middle term is it's the outside terms and the inside terms first multiplied and then added together to get that. What does this sign mean? That sign means that the two last terms had to be either both positive or both negative. In other words, they both had to be the same. The signs here. Because it would be impossible to have one of these be positive and one of these be negative, and when you multiply them together for the last times last terms, you could not get a positive number here, or a positive term. So they both had to be the same. Now we don't know if they're both positive or both negative yet, so don't write anything in there. What does this sign mean though? This sign means that after we multiply the outside times the outside and the inside times the inside and add them together, it's going to be positive. So if we know these are both positive or both negative, and we know this is positive, then they both have to be positive. Stop the tape and think about that for a second, and maybe even just like try a couple practice problems and see if that works. But that's what's going to happen. So if this is positive and this is positive, then both your terms are going to be positive. Now, why don't we just test it out? After we get this far, is this truly the two binomials that make this trinomial? Well, just try FOIL. Does x times x give you x squared? Yes. Does outside times outside? That gives you 1x. And inside times inside gives you 2x. When you add those together, do you get 3x? Yes. And does the last term times the last term give you this term, 2? Yes, it does. So for any of these factoring ones, you should be able to check yourself to see whether you did it right. Of course, if you get lazy and don't check, you can get a problem wrong. But that's the only way you're going to get a problem wrong here. So what have we learned? We learned that the first factor of our trinomial, the first term of our trinomial, the factors of that make up the two first terms of the binomials. The factors of this make up the two other terms. And the middle term is going to be, we have to do a little detective work, but it's going to be that the outside terms and the inside terms multiplied together and then reduced, and that gives you that. So let's try a couple more, shall we? Okay, here's our second problem. 2x squared plus 9x plus 4. We have a positive sign again, positive there, so we know these are going to be positive. Factors of 2x squared are going to be 2x and x. Now we have choices, though, of our second one. We could have 1 and 4, or we could have 2 and 2. And if you're in doubt, just try some things. Try 2 and 2, and you'll see that it won't work out. Try 1 and 4. If you do it one way, it'll work out, and one way it won't. So don't get too scared. Just try it out. I'm just going to guess this way. Now when you do FOIL, you'll see that 2x times x is 2x squared. Outside times outside is 8x. Plus 1 more x is 9x. And last times last is 4. So that's the right way to do it. Okay? Let's try a third problem. Okay, here's the problem. 2x squared minus 11x minus 6. Go ahead and try to factor that by yourself. Remember, it's going to go into two binomials, but beware, that sign and that sign, we haven't dealt with negatives before, so think what that means. Okay, go ahead and give it a shot. Okay, how'd you do? Well, let's start the way we always start. Let's work on this first term. And again, I gave you a prime number, so it's not going to be a big deal. We know it's going to be 2x and x. But now we have this. And if you think about what that term is, or that sign means, when we had plus, it means we were multiplying either two negatives times each other and two positives times each other to get the last term. Well, now that we have a negative, it means we're multiplying a positive times a negative. So let's put a positive there and a negative there. We might have to switch it around and see how that works, but let's just do this to start. This term now means that, remember, when we multiply one of these times the other, it's going to be a positive thing, and then the other times the other. So in other words, like outside times outside might be positive, and inside times inside might be negative. When we combine them, the negatives are going to win out. We're going to have more negatives than we are positives. That's why we end up with negative 11x. So I look at that to say that, well, I look at it to say I'm going to factor the 6. Here are my choices. I could have 1 and 6, or I can have 2 and 3. And don't get too stuck. Just try some things. Okay? Let's try 3 and 2. 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. 3 times x is 3x. When you combine that, you do have a negative term, but it's not enough. It's only going to be negative 1x. So through some trial and error, and you get better at this, I can see that I'm going to want quite a big term to be negative. And so I don't think I'm going to deal with the 2 and 3. I'm going to deal with the 1 and 6. And I'm going to want the 2 to get multiplied by the 6. And I want it to be negative, which is perfect. So I'm going to put the 6 here and the 1 here. Now let's try it. Now remember, if you can't see that far, that's fine. Just try them out. First times first, 2x squared. Outside times outside is negative 12x. Inside times inside is a positive x. And last times last is negative 6. When I combine these, I get the thing that I want, which is negative 11x. So it's 2x squared minus 11x minus 6, which is what I wanted in the first place. All right? Now, that would be a great lesson for today. But for some crazy reason, your book has crammed a whole nother lesson with this one. So we're going to practice this for quite a bit tomorrow. Don't get stressed out. This is the basics on factoring trinomials. It's also going to teach you, though, about what's called the zero product property, which basically just means that if you have two things multiplied together, think about it, A times B, and I told you that they equal 0. Well, what do you know about A or B? Could this one be really big and this one be really tiny? No. Could this one be positive, this one be negative? No. If A times B equals 0, then what you know is either A equals 0 or B equals 0. That's what you know right away. So if A times B equals 0, either A or B or both equals 0. That's simply what's called the zero product property. And why I say that is because they're going to give you some problems like this. Let's say it's x squared plus 3x plus 2. And now, instead of just giving you that, they're going to say that this whole thing equals 0. So what you're going to do is do what we just practiced doing. You're going to factor this. And we've already factored one just like this. I don't know if you remember that. It's going to factor into two binomials, but this time they're both going to equal 0. X and X are our choices here. 2 and 1 are our choices. They're both going to be positive or negative, but they're both going to be positive, really. 2 and 1, and there you have it. And you can check yourself and make sure you did it right. Now at this point, stop. The zero product property says that if two things are multiplied together and they equal 0, then either that one equals 0 or that one equals 0. And so that gives us a clue for how to solve a problem like this. We're going to set this equal to 0, and then we're going to set this one equal to 0, and we're going to solve them. So x plus 2 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. And now we just solve for x. Take the 2 to the other side, x equals negative 2. Take the 1 to the other side, x equals negative 1. So your choices for what can make this thing true are negative 2 and negative 1. And if you don't believe it, why don't you just plug those in? Negative 2 squared is 4. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. So does 4 minus 6 plus 2 really equal 0? Yes, it does. Try the negative 1 in there, same thing. So that's how the zero product property works. They're going to give you a trinomial, you're going to factor it, you're going to set both of those individual broken up binomials equal to 0, and you're going to solve them. Okay, I know that's a lot. If you need to, watch this over again. But that's our lesson for today, and we'll practice it tomorrow in class. Okay? All right.